All right, so we are now recording. This is Thursday, July 2nd, right around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and it is the day before a holiday. The day before the 4th of July holiday is celebrated. So we're expecting sort of a smaller crowd today, which is fine. Welcome everybody to the ArcGIS Pro Workshop. We're not necessarily going to talk about anything in Parcel Fabric. We can if we want to, but we want to sort of focus on the core functionality inside of Pro. Let's sort of go through our normal slides. We do have some new people here that we haven't had for a while. So this started out in which a good friend of mine, Nancy von Meyer, and I were having a discussion. And she was asking me about how to do certain things. And I mentioned to her that what we do with ArcGIS Pro and how we manage it in Pro. And I went and Nancy, oh my gosh, Nancy, we still can't hear you. We still can't hear you. But I am so glad you joined.
There I am. How are you doing, bud?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
I am
Back at the office. So.
I am so glad. Thank you. So I was just going to tell people about this, how this all started, and maybe you can
Well,
fill it. Maybe you can do it instead. Go ahead.
no, you go. You go. I like listening to you. You go.
Okay. So Nancy and I have known each other for a long time, and we're good friends. And I happen to be, explaining to her some of the things that you could do in Pro, and she said, so I was like, well, why don't you demonstrate that to me? So we did a go-to meeting, and I showed her how to do certain things in Pro, and she was like, oh my gosh, why doesn't Esri show us how to do those things? Right? And I said, yeah, why? And it was like, well, because you really need to understand what you're looking for and what you want to do with it. And it may not be sexy what you're doing, but there are the things that we as certain mappers and certain, people that work with GIS all the time, we have to work with these things. So we said, well, why don't we start doing like some workshops and things like that? And so right around that same time, COVID hit, and everybody is now, shelter at home and do that. So we being Panda, decided, hey, let's go and put on a series of seminars. And what started out as 1 month has now become 4 seminars a month, so that literally every single week there is a new topic, a different topic, and it's a free workshop. But more importantly, I would say it's free training, because the workshops are not necessarily set topics or set criteria that we're going to go over. It is, we're going to have a general topic. Okay, well, now I'll start to show something, and then you start asking questions. And we're going to take this wherever you want to go, not where we want to go. Matter of fact, if you go through this, you'll hear me say, are there any questions or anything you want to talk about, anything you want me to show? And that's really what's going to make this meaningful for everybody, is make sure that we give you something that you didn't see before, something that you're wondering, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to do that? That's really what this is. This is education. This is literally free training, but you drive the training, not us. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about the the GoToMeeting interface. Should be what you're looking at right now. There are webcams up at the top of the interface. If you pull it down, it will show you who's here. Whether you show everybody, you'll see everybody, even those that don't have a webcam on. But usually what I suggest is that you go with the active cameras, so that you see Nancy, Chris, and myself. And you only see those people that are willing to or want to go and share their webcam. The next thing is the participants. If you go over here, on the right-hand side, you'll see an icon that looks like people. You'll see that we have 14 people in there right now, and it'll show you who those people are. And then there is a chat window in which you can chat to either everyone, or you can chat to specific people. And when you pull down this list here, it will show you who you can do the chat to. So you can actually have private chats in here. Finally, if you're not hearing us correctly, the settings will allow you to go and modify both the webcam, the microphone you're using, and the headphones or speakers that you're using on there. All right. The goal, real quickly, the goal here, we want this to be an interactive, and that's the key, interactive learning experience. Only have a few slides, if any. Literally, these are the slides right here. This is not a webinar. This is more like an event. You have to ask questions, either audibly or chat, and Chris will moderate. So Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Chris Conkling. I'm Frank's son, if it wasn't already apparent. I've been working with Panda for about just short of 3 years now, and I've been in both the map Parcel Fabric and the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric for over like the last 3 years as well. But yeah, prior to working for Panda, I had barely any experience in GIS outside of listening to Frank talk since I was a kid. But I've learned a lot from him, both him and Mr. Brian Kelly. He's also in here. So yeah.
Good. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. I'm also going to be watching the chat as Frank said. So if you do have any questions, I'll just interrupt him and relay them to him.
Thank you. Thank you. So by the way, when it gets slow and you're not asking much, I wind up going and looking at the chat also. I prefer to just say focus on what I'm doing now. So the way we make sure that you understand what the topics are for each of them is we send out email blasts and we send out notices. And at the bottom of it, it has a subscription so that you can go and subscribe and tell us what you want and such. And just sign up for it and you'll get the email blasts as you go. All right, that's it. That's it for today. No more slides. So on the general topics for today's ArcGIS Pro.
Before you do start though.
Yes, sir.
Mark actually already has a question in the chat. He says, Frank, one question I have is that when I perform an adjustment with the ArcMap fabric, I notice that ArcMap tries to retain distances over bearings. Is this an issue in Arc Pro, and how can he fix this? I know that's kind of off base for what we were planning on talking about today, but
yeah, the adjustments inside of ArcMap are basically, and I'm assuming because there's actually two different ways you can do an adjustments. One is a least squares adjustment, which actually reads the bearings and distances on there, and it uses those distances together with weighting on the accuracy attribute field to try to figure out where to go and put anything. So it does weight it according to that. The bearings, I think, have lesser extent on there, but I think it does do that. That's one of the things. ArcMap, there actually are two different variations on the adjustments, and I got to be careful with this because this is still, Esri hasn't fully gone and exposed this. This is in 2.6. We're seeing the first installation of adjustments. They will allow you to do both a constraint adjustment and then also a least squares adjustment. Again, they're still working on it. I suspect 2.7 will be the best way to start doing it. But again, there's multiple ways to do adjustments in both of them. All right. What else we got? So Nancy, I'm going to ask again. Our main topic for today was labeling and symbology. Where do we want to, go with that, or do we want to do something else in here?
Well, I kind of want to pick up on this adjustment thing just for a second. I don't want to dwell on it, but I started this university, at the University of Maryland, an online class, and it's really, boy, it's really kicking my butt. I didn't realize how hard these seniors in college work. I'm telling you, I don't recommend jumping into a senior level class out of the cold, but my intent was to have something to keep me occupied over the summer as I worked on my parcel book rewrite. And of course, my summer's been turned a little bit upside down, but here nor there. It's a course on networks and social networking and the relationship of social networks and how that relates to traditional networks. And this instructor, if you run across anything by her, I highly recommend it. Her name is Jennifer Golbeck, Golbeck. She does a really great job of explaining basic network concepts. The stuff that I had so long ago, it was eons ago. I mean, I don't know if they had networks when I was an undergraduate, but it's really intriguing. And what I've been doing is taking, of course, everything centers around parcels. What else is new? So I've been taking this concept of networks, basic computer networks and social networks that she's been teaching and trying to apply to adjustment networks and this idea of directional, non-directional networks and strongly connected and weakly connected. And what's intriguing to me is that, and I don't know if I'll put this in this new version of the parcel book or not, I'm still deciding if it's substantial, so I'd like some feedback on that. But if you do an analysis of the measure of all the corners in your network, now that this looks like the PLSS, but if you did an analysis in a typical parcel map of all the places where you had a corner, an individual corner, not just a monument, not just a legal corner, but
Right.
a representation of that.
Even something that might be redacted or not redacted, but protracted. Yeah.
Right. Or you may have a porcupine situation with multiple monuments coming into this, here's the legal corner and it's got 5 monuments. And so you have measurements of those different monuments. And in a network analogy, using traditional computer networks, you can analyze that actually. And you can come up with some characterizations of the network. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, so this is just a pre-4th kind of brain crash, but certainly there has to be a way that we can use the computer network analysis software that's readily available. It's on GitHub, it's free, it's shareware, and run it through some analysis of the parcel thing to determine when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to do an adjustment. And then when you do that adjustment, how should you do it, right? So should it be fully constrained, partially constrained, minimally constrained? What are the expected outcomes? What is the impact of waiting on that? What's the impact of putting in directionality? Like if in a legal description it goes from, like in your diagram, if the legal description goes up, over, and down on that square at the top, should we, as part of the adjustment, enforce that directionality? Does it matter? And if you do and if you don't, what does happen? But I'm thinking about it in terms of parcels in particular. So is a legal description really the same as a survey observation, a measurement? Mm-hmm. If it is, then how do we handle it? So that's kind of where my brain has been. And this question of the adjustment kind of spurned that thought in my head again. Is like, I wonder if there's a way we can quantify that.
So Nancy, let's stop here. Let's put this in hold. So maybe we take this in the office hours, or maybe we handle it right now. This is a really exciting topic. So I'm going to ask those, the 15 people that are here in the chat window, tell us, do you want to continue this topic, or do you want to go back to ArcGIS Pro and look at labels and symbology? Let's give them that option, all right? Because you and I can talk for 4 hours about this, but I want to make sure that those people that have come here want to talk about this. So let's go ahead to the chat window and tell us, do you want to talk about adjustment? You want to talk about pro symbology? Go ahead and put it in the chat window.
We have adjustments are cool.
Yeah.
Adjustments. So 2 for adjustments.
Hey, Kelly.
Yep. Come on, those of you that want to just do ArcGIS Pro Symbology, you better put something there, or we're going to start really getting deep in this.
Oh, another for adjustments.
And don't let me sway you. I mean, if you want to talk about labeling, that's
Oh,
fine.
no, no. Oh, no, Nancy, I would much rather talk about adjustments. Yeah. Okay, you know what? Hey, I think we
Adjustments
have our
with
answer.
labeling.
I think we have our answer here, right? So let's talk about adjustments. So Nancy, I think you hit it on the head here in that the question is when you're
Hey
going to
Frank, before we
analyze.
get wait, before we get too deep into it, let's take 15 minutes and talk a little bit about the adjustments, and then let's let you go on to the labeling, because I don't really want to dominate the thing. Let's just do a little bit so people still get what they called for. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. So and we'll see how long this discussion goes. Yeah. So again, you hit it on the head here that the problem with applying adjustments to GIS data, and it's not just parcel data, but to any sort of GIS data, is you need to have a really, really good definition of the quality of the information that's stored on that data. All right. Is this just a conceptual representation of the location of a specific point? All right. Before you get into even derivations of how that data was acquired, is it a real representation of a corner on here? By the way, this is being recorded, so you can go back.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got that question, and I don't intuitively, I do not believe from the 40 years of mapping that I've done, I don't believe that there are even a fairly robust minority of people that know that much about the data to be able to really say, I can conclude that my data is good enough to be able to go and apply an adjustment if you're doing something other than just looking at this scattershot set of points out there. It's going to be problematic to do that, and it will give you false answers on it. You know, as you and I know, Nancy, as surveyors, the traditional types of adjustments that are applied to observations, right? There's an observation of the distance or the direction between two corners. So with that observation, we know what we in GIS would call metadata about that observation. We know when it was taken, what the instruments were that took it, whether or not there are any conditions that would allow us to go and determine that there might be some blunder or some sort of error that was introduced in there. I mean, as surveyors, we analyze error propagation and identification, right?
Right.
I don't think that most GIS data sets have that amount of scrutiny associated with them. So we start from there. I think it's problematic. All right. I think it's really problematic in trying to do that. But then go ahead.
So yeah, I concur, right? It's probably problematic, but when you talk about computer networks, you have it's graph theory, essentially. They used to call computer networks graphs.
Right, it's a graph.
But they have this concept of the subnetwork, right? So you have a well-connected network, and then within that well-connected network, you have this idea of a subnetwork. And so if we could have a systematic way or a rule-based system within our parcel data of identifying that this is a subnetwork, so that when we applied adjustments, we applied them to subnetworks that were logical. So we didn't just adjust these 4 parcels. If those 4 parcels were part of an entire subdivision, maybe by rule that subdivision would be a subnetwork. And if you did any changes here, you would need to do it to the whole thing, or you would have to have enough new information to adjust the entire subnetwork when you don't do the adjustment. I'm thinking out loud here. This is just brainstorm. This may or may not be wrong, but it's kind of what I'm thinking. Then you would do the adjustment to that subnetwork, and only those points in that subnetwork that were well defined, that were the robust. So I'm introducing another term here, the concept of robust. If the point is monumented and it's well known, and the measurements go actually to the monument that's being defined, then the parcel data within that subnetwork could then be shifted somehow to match the updated subnetwork framework, but you wouldn't actually be adjusting the individual parcels. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and you're on the right track, especially Dan, the NDAs. You know, let's so the Parcel Fabric adjustment software that has been introduced with that is being introduced with 2.6 actually allows you to do phased adjustments in there, and it looks at sub networks to go and do those adjustments in there. All right. So you have the ability to go and have the constrained adjustments within specific sub networks, and then to go and extrapolate that out into these uncontrolled outer networks also. It can do multiple adjustments within those and combine them through and take those adjustments and propagate them across the rest of it. And that's the way to do it. It's not the way it used to be in ArcMap where it did everything. You know, it can create its own and you can identify those. Challenge though is that you've got to have sufficient information about the robustness of those. I mean, first of all, what is a subnet? Is a subnetwork a part of a record using the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric terminology? Yes, that's what it should be. That's where we're looking to get this parcel data. Okay, you start building these subnetworks by building the records so that you understand what goes with what's part of what has some lineage as a result of, so when you start adjusting this bigger thing, maybe it goes and propagates down to the smaller thing, but we don't have that now. We still don't have that yet. And then, like you and I say, you still have to go and think about, well, do you have enough evidence of the quality of those points that are in there? All right. And again, from initial mapping, you can handle that, but we also have all of this heritage, all of this archive stuff that, as you and I know, a lot of this was just digitized. And so there are approximations, there's schematics of what these property interests are supposed to be. But you're right. I think that's where we should be going, is that sort of an adjustment that's much more controlled than what we have right now. But we just need to get our data up to that quality.
So I would propose to you that if your data are digitized from a hard, deed, transcribed on a hard copy map, digitized, brought into a computer, values inversed, and that's what you're working with, that at that point, you're about as well off to snap, which is why I love the snapping tool, to snap the data to what the intended description was.
Yeah.
So if it was intended to be on the road center line, put it on the road center line. I don't know.
Yeah. So,
and I think at some point in time, your data passes that, right? At some point in time, you get enough measurements, you get enough legal descriptions, and it kind of gets to be robust enough that then you can say, okay, now I'm ready to push the button and adjust this subnetwork, and then I can watch the effect of that on my digitized stuff. I just think that we introduce artificial accuracy when we try to apply something as rigorous as an adjustment to data that was digitized in.
That's exactly my point. And so that's one level. The next level is that if this was a coordinate-based cadaster, right? If in fact the United States had some sort of a coordinate-based cadaster, it would be easier to go and look at the individual elements of it and apply some adjustments to it. But you know as well as I do that that's not the type of cadaster we have. We have, in fact, a description-based cadaster, so that the quality of the description has an impact on how something gets adjusted. So, for example, and Nancy, you and I have talked about this a lot, about when we go over and let me go here, create. Okay. So if I'm going and building this parcel, all right, if I have a simple little, sectional breakdown, I can in fact build it, and my aliquot breakdown of that should be sufficient, because that original type of description is based upon the location of these four corners. All right.
Okay.
And once you adjust those four corners, it should adjust all those aliquot elements on there. And again, the adjustments primarily are going to be sort of proportional away from how far that control it, or how far those corners are away from the control, or how much respectively each of those corners gets an adjustment. And then you attempt to figure out, well, as you move away from it, how is that adjustment varied? Okay, so the problem is with a legal description based cadaster, what happens when my description says, and this is, again, Kelly's heard this before, the north 1,000 feet of that parcel. All right. So the actual location of this line is not dependent upon this corner, is not dependent upon this corner. It's only dependent upon those two corners. All right. The movement up or down has no relevance at all, because that legal description says it's the north 1,000 feet of that parcel, so that these corners can move way down here, and it should never move that line. All right, so we've got to find a way to go and somehow embed inside of our data that where these points or where these lines are dependent upon as a result of these different types of descriptions. All right, so that this one here never moves if it originally was described as an aliquot description, which was a portion off of a specific line. Okay, the same thing happens with a meets and bounds. With a meets and bounds description, all right, that description is self-contained. It's its own subnet in there. It's its own description there. And the location of it should not be expanding that way or this way. It should be determined, inside of its own subnetwork. It should not be, well, how far did this thing move? And I'm going to adjust this point as a result of that adjustment. It has to be defined as a subnetwork. Further, what happens when you get a point of commencement to a point of beginning here? Then you've got to find a way to tag that data that says, okay, now the location of this is completely dependent upon the location of this corner. Not this corner, not this corner, not this corner. So you can't have any sort of kriging or any sort of adjustment between them. You have to be able to go and determine what the control is for each of these sub-elements within there. And that, from a data modeling standpoint, is very, very difficult to do. That's where we've never, I remember talking 25, 30 years ago about a measurement system that was dependent upon where is your control that controls the location of these corners. And we're not there yet. We're still looking at points, lines, and polygons that with no real data about them. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but I think it's interesting. I think adjustments really play a role in the future of where we're headed with parcel data. I think it might play a role even in aggregation of data from different sources into a common database. But yeah, it's highly nuanced, right? It's highly nuanced.
It's highly nuanced, and I mean the whole conflation issue that we get when we start looking at aggregating this data, which has got no heritage on it, no lineage, nothing about how this
Yeah,
thing matches up. We might as well just snap it all together, right?
yeah, yeah. Just snap it in there. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it is a challenging, and I go and I applaud the work that a lot of these teams are doing to try to go and apply adjustments um, on an international basis. Because again, if you've got a system which is a coordinate-based cadaster, yeah, you can do something because there's certain elements about it that are consistent. But you know what, Turin systems, again, you have certain elements that are consistent. But when you look at what a majority of the US uses, it is a legal description based cadaster, and it comes down to the location of controlling monuments. And that's where we're falling down. We have no way to go and do that. And that's the reason why all too often you get, even without adjustments, you get pincushion corners out there where even the surveyors, the private surveyors, they're still trying to figure out, am I doing an original survey? Am I retracing a survey? Where am I coming from? And they all have their own opinions of where this is. So when you try to go and memorialize that some way to go and so that you can automate it, it becomes much more difficult to do. I think there's great movement towards it, but this is a challenge I'm not sure anybody has really focused on to say, how do we take parcels? As surveyors, we understand we could take observations all day and apply these adjustments, because it's easy for us to go and figure out mathematically how to go and do it. But how do you take a legal description and do it?
So here's my analogy, and then I'm move on to labeling, I guess. But my analogy that I'm kind of working with is sort of the surveyors, sort of the network scientist, the IT person when it comes to nodes and connecting things, observations and edges. But when we get down to doing the parcel mapping, we're sort of the Twitter or the Facebook. We take the networks and then go do something completely unintended with the network. You know, we're publishing recipes and gardening tips and dog pictures. And, you know, so we're about as far away from the original IT structure as intended, yet we've put this social fabric on top of it. And I almost feel like, in a sense, with the parcel data, we're doing the same thing. We're taking an underlying concept of measurement and observation, and then we're laying on top of it this fabric of tax parcel, of zoning, of land use. And maybe we're getting, you know, maybe we're separating ourselves from the original intent. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of maybe what we're doing. Just random thoughts.
You know, that's an interesting concept because, in fact, in many ways, not in many ways, in almost all ways, I agree that the way the data is being used right now either shouldn't be used that way or it's being used for unintended consequences that I don't think anybody's really analyzed whether these are valid uses for it. So
I heard a case the other day of a small county that had parcel data, maybe 7,000 parcels. I don't know, 7 to 10, maybe 12,000. Georgia counties are pretty small. So that, but they had a new LiDAR project, and they used the parcel data to quality check their topography data by using the parcel data as the sample size. So they went into every parcel and did a delta on the elevation, the high and low elevation within every parcel. And if they found an elevation, and they put it all on a gradient, and if the parcels that had a high parcel grade, a high elevation gradient, they went back in and used that to validate that the topography map was correct. So they essentially use the parcel. It's not parcels at all. It just happens to be a convenient tile size for checking their LiDAR. Okay, curious observation, right? It's not unlike me sharing pictures of my sleeping dog on a high-powered NASA network, right?
right.
wasn't intended for that, but here's a cute picture of my dog. Unintended consequence, but interesting.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Those of us that are involved with GIS to truly understand what we've got in our individual data structures. And I think that's a part that's always been missing, is that we're really not doing that as well as we could have. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is Instagram, and we should forget about it and
Yeah.
just use it that way.
Use it.
Yeah. But when we want to try to start doing an analysis of it, the challenge is always, well, now we're taking pictures of dogs and trying to extrapolate that to figure out what effect the economy is going to have on, as a result of this. It's like, more dogs means the economy is going to get better. Less dogs, more cats is going to mean we're going to have problems. I don't know. And I'm open for having other people comment on here. Does anybody have any thoughts or any elements on here on this? By the way, I am so happy, Nancy, to hear that you are doing an update to the parcel book. I really am.
Thank you. It's going to take me all summer. Like, nothing is going to happen before September, I can tell already, but I'm getting there.
Good. Yeah, it's so going back full circle to this adjustments. And I think the problem, Nancy, you and I have both gone through, and we've been educated in how to go and do adjustments from a mathematical standpoint and how those adjustments get applied, and we sort of know what the requirements are, and we come from that background, and perhaps we need to sort of free some of that up and say, well, maybe adjustments aren't as bad, because maybe you can adjust bad data and somehow make it closer to the reality, and maybe it doesn't have to have that an intense data structure, or to have those control points be as robust as possible.
Yeah, maybe the economy does depend on how many pictures of dogs are on the internet. Who knows, right? I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Just interesting sidetrack, though. Honestly, I apologize, you guys, for taking off track. It's just where my brain has been.
No, and hopefully you stay after the workshop, because what we do is we turn off the recording and we go into what we call office hours and just sort of free form about that. And I would love to keep you continue with that discussion. I think there's a lot to explore there. I really is. Like I said, I, like you, for 35, 40 years, I've been looking for a way to go and adjust parcels, to find some way, some data structure that's better off, and some better way to go and do this than what we're doing right now, because it just isn't right. Good. So Nancy says we should continue this now, or to continue it later, or excuse me, Kelly. All right.
She says either is fine.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. I have to confess, my attention span is not what it was before the beginning of June. So I'm really only good in 45, 50-minute segments. So I think let's move on.
It's completely fine, Nancy. Completely understandable. All right. So what we wanted to talk about was symbology and labeling on Pro. And again, there's a lot of different little nuances in Pro above and beyond what we're used to seeing in ArcMap. And we just want to explore some of those. This is not a deep dive. This is just exploring how to go and symbolize certain things in here. For example, the one thing that we've shown many people here before is how to go and show the vertices on polygons or even on lines as you're going and building them. Let's do lines first, all right? So inside of the Symbology element for ArcGIS Pro, they've sort of exposed the ability to have multiple scale-based components to the individual symbology. So right now, I've got this set up so that I can draw a line. All right, I can draw individual lines, and there's really minimal symbology on here. That's what we're used to seeing with ArcMap. And when I go and do this, because these are all 2-point lines, I can go and draw a multi-line here. And that's the type of symbology we're used to with ArcMap. Within ArcGIS Pro, we have the capability to do more than that. We have the capability to do things such as show us the vertices. Let us see not just the vertices, but which way it's going and all of this element on here. So let's explore this with lines a little bit for symbology. So I am right now in my drawing order, my list by drawing order. And if I just left click on this, it brings up, in this case, because I have unique values, but I can have just individual values. It brings up the ability to go, I can see the gallery or I can see properties. To really explore this, you want to go and click on the properties component of this symbol. And again, this allows you to just very briefly see the simple symbology of this. This is what we saw in ArcMap. The next icon over allows you to go and explore a little bit further, sort of any layers or anything special that you might have on there. If we go one more, it allows us to actually change the structure of the symbology that we see. All right, so again, this is something very simple, but we could go and say that what we want to do is we want to go and add a new layer to in this case, the lines, and we want this to be a marker layer. We want this marker symbol to be attached to the lines that we're drawing. And if we look right now, it's just going to show us that's what that marker is going to look like. It's just going to have a bunch of symbols on here. So we'll go back from there to the portion of it that allows us to control that symbol. And we can click on this one, which is the stroke for the line, or this is the next layer, the next sort of component of that complex symbology, and allows us to do it. And let's look at the marker. And we can go and change that marker. And we can say, let's go and change that to a red. And you'll note here when we do that, it's red. And we can go down here further and say the size of that marker. Let's make it so we can at least see it. Let's make it 6 points. And as we scroll down further, we have all sorts of elements on here. We can see what's the position on here. If we have endpoints on here, where do we put the points at the ends of the lines? Do we offset them? Do we keep them? We have a lot of offset distance, rotations. The one for this example, we're going to look at the marker placement. This is the shape marker. We're going to look at the marker placement, and we can pull this down. Where do we put this marker? So in this case, we're going to say just put this marker at the vertices of the line. Now recognize that within a line, there's two different places. There is the vertices, which are interim vertices, and then there's the extremities, which are the beginning and the end point of the line. So in this case, I'm going to put red markers at the location of the vertices of my line. And I hit apply, And we should in fact see there's the vertices of that line. But if I look over on these, because these were created with 2-point lines, they are separate lines. If we go in here and select these, that's a line, that's a line. All right, so they're not multi lines, they are 2-point lines. But this one has individual vertices on there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back there and I'm going to add another marker layer. And then I'm going to go back here and say, okay, with that, what I'm going to go is I'm going to make this green, make this 6-point, and then I'm going to place it not along the line, but I'm going to put it at the extremities of the line. I'm going to put it, in this case, at the beginning of the line and the ending of the line. So I actually have a complex symbology which has the core element, and then it has the vertices having a separate marker on them and the extremities having another marker on them. And I can go and apply this, and now I can see where the lines begin, where the lines end. And I can see all the vertices in the middle of it. And I can also go and use this same sort of symbology to go and analyze, well, if I want to, I can have an arrow that says point in the direction of the line. That's just another marker that I can add. And then I can take that marker and I can go and do things such as I can identify, let me go back up here, I can identify the shape of that marker. Because right now I've just been using points, but I can identify that I want that thing to be an arrow or something to go and do it. And where do I want it to be placed? I might want it to be placed in the middle of the line on there. So I can build this complexity as I'm going, as I go further and further along. I'm going to uncheck that so I don't see that. All right. So that's the first thing you want to look at, is the fact that you have the ability to do complex symbology on something as simple as a line feature or the polygon feature class. Polygons are let's apply this just to make sure. So if we go to polygon features, I'm going to go in and do the same thing. I'm going to here, and I'll do this easier. I'll go and I will change this. I'll just completely remove it. And this was the simple parcels, all right? So I'll bring my simple parcels again, and now I will do the same sort of thing. I will look at the symbology of my polygons. First of all, I should ask, are there any questions about the symbology of a line? There's still a little bit more components in there, but are there any questions on that? Let me one more thing here. When we're done with this, if I go back over here, there's another element to it, in that not only do you have complex symbology that you could put on this feature, but I have the ability to have it set up so that as I zoom in and out, as my scale changes, my symbology changes. All right? So that those of you that are going to be using the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, be warned beforehand that the default symbology coming out of there has it set so that as you zoom out, things such as connection lines, which are the main, origin connection lines, we used to call them inside of ArcMap. As you zoom out, once you reach a certain scale, those things stop displaying, so that as you go in there, you might be going to map out something that's at a larger scale and suddenly you don't see a line anymore. It's because your scale has been set on there, because you can have multiple scale symbology set up. All right, let's explore that a little bit more. So here's the various classes on here. So I'm right now on Symbology, and I'm going to my scales. And over here, it shows me that I only have one. This here is the scale dependency, so that as I set it back here, so that's as I set it here, it tells me where that scale dependency is and when it's displayed and when it's not displayed. All right. So I now have it set that those lines disappear as I scale in. Now they come back again. So just be aware that this complex symbology allows you to do some amazing things, including setting multiple complex symbology on it and then put scale dependency upon it. But you want to be aware of how you set that up. Again, in here, I'm telling it to only display it once it reaches a certain scale level. Well, all right, so there it is. All right, so you want to be careful with that. You want to recognize that this scale has an impact on it, and if you find that your layers are disappearing, be aware that in fact you could have complex symbology set up that has scale dependency on it, multiple scales. So just sort of to understand it. Go ahead.
Is there a way to override that, like to get a view that says, show me everything without the scale dependency, just so I can get a sense of what's here and then turn it back on? I mean, can you toggle in between those two things?
I don't, let's look at something here.
That's pretty cool, but I could see
yeah,
getting pretty mad at my computer.
First couple times I encountered it, it was like, what's going on here? I don't understand what's happening with this.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, there's some way to just kind of temporarily override and say, just show me everything so I get a sense of what the real deal is, and then yeah, okay, I get it.
I have not seen where you can say just turn it on no matter what. I haven't seen that.
Okay.
But just sort of to show you inside of a parcel fabric. All right, so if I look over here, now because this is white, you can't see it. General here, let's change this to a light theme so we can see this. I'll do that. I want to go here. Sorry. So Nancy, you are right. It's a cool way to mess with some people. I was doing this with a client up in Idaho, and they'd zoom out to go and do a sectional breakdown. They're like, it disappeared completely.
It's like, oh no, you broke it. Oh no, you broke it. We have to start over. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look here on our tax lines, and by default, it's a line, and then it has like a half of a circle on the beginning and ending when you zoomed in. But as I zoom out, look at what's happening. If you watch the symbology here, as I zoom out, they disappear.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The end symbology disappears. And if I look at this, all right, and go to my properties, go back over here, go to my scales, and see this right here? This is, how do you set that symbology on here? So let me just try something here just to see if, let's make sure I turn everything else off here. Turn my points off here. So yeah, and here the tax lines are still on as I zoom in and out, but yeah, so now I've zoomed in close enough to be able to see them. Connection lines are set by default to automatically disappear at a certain scale. It's like 1 to 2400, they disappear. So yeah, you can see that this symbology is bad. So if I go in here, and look at this, and again, and go to scales, here is the scale telling me at what scale does it stop displaying. So usually just between you and me, I go in there and move it all the way over and say, if you're going to show it all the time as far as that advanced symbology. And you can see here's the scale right now at which it displays this symbology to that scale, and that from point forward it displays that symbology is the way it works. Okay, just sort of, yeah. Let's be aware of that. Okay, so that was lines, and you just want to be aware of that with lines. That's how that thing works. And then let's look at the symbology for parcels. All right. So we've got a couple of things inside of symbology that we want to go in and look at. Let's first look at the fill on symbology. Okay, so inside of here, again, I can click on here and pull this down, and this is my normal sort of picking on it. I can go and set this up using HGB and a transparency on here. I can pick it here. I can go and change that to a style. I can change my models, but this was all the way we could do this inside of ArcMap. It's the exact same the way you can do it. You can set your own hex number on here if you know what that is. The important thing you want to recognize on this is that you can go in here and you can pick a color here. All right. And if you wish to set a transparency on this one color, you can go and do it here and say that I want this to be 60% transparent. All right, when it goes and applies from a symbology standpoint. All right, I can then go and hit apply. That single color will be 60% transparent. All right, but if I wish, so, and you can do that on every single element of symbology. When you get a color selector, all right, when I get a color selector, I can go down here to the color properties and set my transparency for that individual color. So I have a lot of flexibility to go and put not just the color on here, but how intense that color is. Is it translucent in any way? I can set all of that on there. Or if I have a single symbology set, so for example, if I have a polygon that has multiple variables that I'm going in, and I just want to go in and sort of change the appearance of everything in that layer, I don't do it here under symbology. Instead, I do it under appearance. Under appearance, you also have a transparency setting, which will set that entire layer. So it will say, okay, now take this entire layer and make it 50% transparent. So there's multiple levels of how you might set the transparency with any single symbol or any single layer on there. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you do there. So let's go back here now, and I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to turn off that, and I'm going to focus on my lines, because now I want to go and put symbols on my lines, and I want to go and make sure. Let's turn off these others so we don't get confused by them. All right. So on here, I want to do the same thing I did with lines, but the options I have with the polygon are different than what I have with the line feature classes. So I want to go, and again, let's make sure we understand how to get to this. Let's go back here. In order to get to this place, I can go through Symbology, but I have found the fastest way is just click on the symbol, and then you will wind up getting into this where you get the individual capabilities. Again, the gallery, the individual properties of the layer, or the structure itself. So in this case, I want to go in here and I want to add a new marker symbol. And again, with this structural element, you only can add or delete, you don't symbolize. You just add or delete multiple layers within that complex structure. And then on the layers is where you actually tell it how you want that thing to be symbolized. All right, so in this case, I can say, go ahead and symbolize this. Let's make the parcel itself, or let's make that symbol itself this color. Let's go down and choose the same thing as far as the sizes. On the placement, I have different options here. I can place this so that it's along the line at various random spaces, at variable spaces, on the lines, on the vertices. All right. At ratio positions at the center of my polygon, or I can fill it. In this case, I'm going to do it on the vertices of my polygon and say, go ahead and apply this. So in this case, just that very simple thing, I just want to see where are the individual vertices for my polygon. And to prove that, if I go in here and select this polygon, and then go over here and say, show me the vertices on that polygon, there are the vertices on there. All right. So, by the way, just a reminder, because it's sometimes as you're going through this, the green vertices are interim vertices. The red one, that's the beginning and ending point of that polygon. All right. Make sure you get off of that. Okay. So in this case, I don't even know how many we have here. Okay, we have quite a few of them. So for the most part, everything other than this is pretty much like ArcMap. If we want to go in here and symbolize this, we right click, go to Symbology, and we tell it, do we want to do a single symbol? Do we want to do unique values? Do we want to do gradient colors, gradient symbols, unclassed, proportional symbols? So let's say we do gradient colors on here, and we do it according to the shape area field in here. So we tell it the number of groups we're going to have, whether or not they split it up according to, Jenks methodology for creating breaks, or quantile, or equal interval, or whatever we want to do on there. And it's the same sort of thing. It works exactly the same as ArcMap did, but it's just a slightly different interface. Notice one of the things that's different is that on here, with the Symbology, as soon as I choose it, it applies it. Right? As soon as I choose it, it applies it. It's done. It's applied. It's there. I didn't hit apply anywhere. which can be problematic. If you're going to go into a parcel layer, a parcel polygon layer, and you tell it to do unique values, and somehow you hit on parcel ID, it literally will read the entire thing and apply that symbology without you even saying, oh, apply this. You don't get a choice. It does it. That's the bad part. The good part is that, in fact, the undo and the redo inside of Pro is so much nicer than it used to be in ArcMap. In ArcMap, the only thing you could undo would be the edits. Now, inside of Pro, I have the ability to go and pull down and say, I want to do my mapping changes, meaning the symbology changes, or I want to undo the editing changes. So I can say, show me all the changes that have occurred. And if I look here, it's going to say, okay, here is the update to symbology, make invisible the layers, update the symbology. So these are all symbology changes, all mapping changes, and then here's the edit changes. I can pull this down and say, okay, under the all, I can say, just show me the mapping changes. Or I can say, pull this down and say, just show me the edit changes. And it goes and creates the edit changes. So I have the capability, if I do this and I make a mistake, I can say just, yeah, undo this one. All right, undo this one, and it will undo all of that in there. Same way with redo, I can say redo the symbology again. So even though it automatically applies, all right, I can, even though it automatically applies, I can tell it whether or not to undo or redo, or how those undos and redos occur, whether they are editing undos, redos, or whether they are mapping and symbology ones that I apply in here. It gives you the capability to go and expand, not just, oh, just undo edits. No, it's undo anything in here as you go. And remember, you can undo up to a save. Once you save, you're out of luck. So Steve Clarity, because Chris had to leave us here, aren't there some other pro symbology change scenarios where it doesn't automatically apply? Then the next thing you click or do, it prompts with, you haven't changed that. Yes, matter of fact, yes, there are. And you actually saw that when I put in here and said, let's do this. So when I decided to go in here and look here and let me see here. When I decided to say, go ahead and add a marker, and then I went in here and I went and symbolized it. All right. Told it to go ahead and put it on the vertices. There is an apply here. If I attempt to go back over here, again, it should prompt me to whether or not I want to go and apply this. If I go here, yeah, there are some times in which when I'm changing the structure of the symbology, it will prompt me because I do have to save that. But just the simple changes of how it is symbolized, not changing and adding elements or not, that doesn't prompt you. It's only when it's changing the structure that it actually will prompt you. There might be some other scenarios, but I'm not that sure about that. For full disclosure, I haven't gone too deep into ArcPro yet, but I'll swear I've seen that prompt before. You did see it. You just saw what I just did with it. Yeah, it is. It is whether or not you're doing something as far as complex with the structure. That prompts, it says, you sure you want to do that? And then, but if it's just symbology changes, I can go in here and I can say, change the symbology and make it not simple, but make it unique and put it on again, This is easy, do it on here. More than 100 values on here, yeah, because I did unique, I didn't do gradient. Graduated colors on here, yeah. And that applies itself right away. And by the way, Steve, that also works the same way with labeling. So if I go in here and let's talk about labeling, and let's just make this simple again. Get rid of this. All right, so let's turn these on. And let's look at sort of developing some simple labels. Again, I don't want to go too deep into this. This isn't a deep dive. This is just sort of introduce you to some of the ArcGIS Pro elements in here and to show you some neat little things that you can do and play with and experiment with that will help you with it. All right. Have we seen enough with symbology, or do you want me to stay with that? First person that responds is the one that decides. Symbology or labeling? There are some cool stuff in there, things like gradients and stuff like that. So labeling, Mark Fall says labeling. Okay. Let's do a couple things in here. Let me go and select all of my current Kogo. Where is my current Kogo? Did I completely delete all that stuff? Nope, I have some Kogo in here. Let's zoom to it. Okay, there it is. All right, so these actually have Kogo attribute fields on them. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to update the Kogo on this and go ahead and update it. By the way, this is really nice because I can tell it to either update everything, the bearings, the distances, or I can tell it to go and only update it if there's a difference, a variance of X number of feet. So I can say only update it if it's more than a foot different from what it was before, or just update everything. Okay, so I've gone and updated this stuff here. Let's go and there it is there. Okay. All right. By the way, Nancy, thank you. Have a great 4th. And let's talk next week sometime. By the way, I do want to mention to everybody before we leave, Panda's going to have an exhibit booth at this year's UC. So the virtual UC, please make sure, again, UC is free this year. Make sure that you stop by our booth. We would love to talk to you. And who knows, we may get into some really interesting discussions. All right, let's talk about labels. Okay, so on labels, we go in here and go right click on it and go label properties. All right. Now by default, if you have a Kogo line in here, you will get a description, so that, excuse me, a label property in which it will actually calculate the Kogo values of things such as your bearings and such. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, go back here. I'm going to walk this back a little bit and say what I want to do is I want to go and label. This is now, that little button over on the right hand side is the label manager. All right, that label manager will go and tell you how, again, it's like the ArcMap label manager, and it allows you to go and set sort of what gets labeled on here. And that turns them on and off. Over here under the labeling for the feature layer, we'll do things such as how far, what's the scale display on here, and I can tell it to go and display this out to 24,000, and in fact it will tell me the distance on there. If I switch between here and here, it gives me the bearing and the distance automatically for that. All right. So you can see my individual classes here. So if I tell it that this one layer here, this polygon layer here, it has one label class here. And again, I'm in the labeling option. I can then say, well, what am I going to go and label this with? In this case, I just changed the label and said, go ahead and label it with the value that's stored in this field. So now you see that it's actually labeling the values that are stored there. So once I can see that I have labeling turned on here, again, labeling overall, turning it on, label for this feature class that's here. I can turn that off, I can turn that on. You want to make sure that you have them both in there. If I want to go and create a new label class, I can do it with this pull down to be able to allow me to create it. And then here is for this feature class, how is it labeled? I can label the value out of a single attribute, or if I wish, I can actually write an expression. These expressions, I have the capability of writing them in Arcade, VBScript, JavaScript, and Python. I highly recommend that you begin writing them in Arcade. Arcade is now used across the ArcGIS platform, and it's useful because I could write something here, set up the labeling expressions, and then publish it out, share it out, and that same label will work on my portal. It will work on ArcGIS Online. It will work wherever I publish this map. So it's one language, sort of like one ring to control them all. This is one language to control them all. All right. Arcade. And I'll show you some simple things with Arcade in here. Mark just said Arcade may be best as you described. Is it the fastest as well, or are they all more or less just as fast? I have seen that again, since it uses the same labeling engine, it's, unless you have a very, very complex element in there, it's just as fast. It's going through the same labeling engine. And the differences between Python and JavaScript and Arcade are pretty much, it's all pretty much the same. Again, as you get into more and more complexity, it might be another story, but how much more complex can you get than this for a labeling expression. And it does that for all of the lines that you're going through. So again, this is Arcade. And let's go back here to these lines in here. And let me go in here and select something. And all right. Go in here. Yeah. So it's fast no matter what you do. I would caution against using VBScript. They allow you that functionality at the moment, but I'm not sure how long they're going to allow that to continue. When we've migrated some parcels over from ArcMap Parcel Fabric to there, you can by default have that symbology go and show up, but I'm not sure how long it's going to be supported on there. So some of the neat things with Arcade. You can go in and you can go and apply and have it do upper and lowercase. Things such as concatenating things together. It basically is just a plus and put it that way, and it will go and concatenate things together. It will go and just the way we had to do it inside of VB, we can add a space to them. If we wish to, pretty sure I've gotten that now. Yeah, if we wish it to go on a new line, it is no longer VB new line. It is text formatting dot new line to go and have it drop down to a new line. I can tell you that one of the things that is coming out with the next release is there's a new way to do new lines just by putting spaces and stuff in there. It's actually very, very nice, some of the changes that are in there. Kelly, thank you for dropping here. The only one in your office today. Take care. Everybody have a fifth. No problem. People dropping off. We're fine with that. All right. So let me go in and show you a little bit more here. So let me go and put in here, for example, let me spell text formatting correct. Okay. So let me go and show you, for example, out of Arcade with labeling, how you might go and calculate the area of a polygon, because you have access to the complete object on here. So inside of here, I can type in area and then say the area of this feature. All right, and I could want this in acres. All right, that's the lowercase there. So I can say go ahead and take this and now calculate this as return the area to me in acreage on here, and it will go and return to me the area in acres. With Arcade, all I really have to do is change the way it's going to go and nope, that's wrong still. I have to go and look at my cheat sheet, sorry. Feet. Yeah. And it will return, instead of returning it in acres, it will return it in square feet. So with Arcade, again, you have access to that object. And one of the methods is show me the area of that object. And I can say, go ahead and return it in acreage. You know, let's go and let's do this the way we normally would. We could round that to 2 decimal places. And then we'll add some text that said AC here. Let's verify it and put it there. So I have to tell you, if anything else, make sure you start looking at Arcade. It's a much nicer scripting language, even in VB, even though a lot of us have been using VB for a really long time. Arcade allows you to go and write some scripting not just to go and for labeling, but you could also use Arcade to set symbology. Arcade is sort of a variation on JavaScript. You can tell it to assign specific symbols to it, specific classes to it. There's a lot that you can do in Arcade. Arcade is used in configuring pop-ups inside of ArcGIS Online. It's writing code here. It's using calculate by features. You use Arcade in there. And those of you that missed the Arcade deep dive, it's amazing what you can do. I can actually write an Arcade script that will go and drill down into other layers to pull attributes from other layers and store them here on here. So again, Arcade is absolutely amazing what it can do and what it will do on here. All right, so is there anything else that anybody wants to see in labeling? Again, with labeling, I now have the ability to go and say, okay, set up my label expression. And here is where you see that when I change this, as soon as I change this here, there's no applying this anymore. As soon as I change this, it goes and changes. All right, so with standard symbology and with standard labeling, as soon as you change that, it displays what it's going to look like. There's no more apply button inside of here, which you sort of learn to accept after a while, especially since you have the ability to go and do the undo for the mapping on here, together with the undo of editing. So there is some safety measures there. It's in a lot of ways, it's much easier to use than the way we used to do it in ArcMap. All right, so Mark, can you pick your favorite font so you don't have to search through hundreds of fonts? You know, here's the recent fonts. I don't know whether you can pick your favorite fonts. That's a good question, Mark. I don't know on here. It's a good suggestion though, but yeah. Steve Clarity is asking, I'm just going through, how is the help documentation on Arcade labels, formatting, and syntax? Let's look it up right now. So by the way, when I am going to when I'm going in to look for it, I usually go to this developers.arcgis.com/arcade. It has things such as a playground in which you can learn it, a functional reference on here. So for example, I can look at my text functions in here, and it will show me, here's my normal type of functions for Arcade. If I want to cat things together, if I want to find a good left, mid, upper, right, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I'll do that. And like I said, there's also a playground. There is a playground which lets you experiment and try things out, where you can pull up a default. Here's attribute rule calculations. There's labeling. So you can try out labeling on here, including things like labeling against the geometry, labeling with multiple names on here, just simple things you can play with. So in case I can go and say, okay, take this one, and then again, put this in here, and then add it together with this one in here. And then let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this. And then I can go to geometry. And anyway, and then I can actually go and test it out. See what's it going to look like. Yeah, thank you. On here, on there. So again, the arcade playground is very nice, but it takes a while to go and learn it. It's mostly in the beginning, just going and looking at what other people have done and going through there, and setting it up from there. All right, we are at the end of an hour and a half, so I'm going to stop this recording here. I especially enjoyed that discussion with Nancy early on, and so and hopefully we gave you a taste of ArcGIS Pro and the symbology and the labeling and some of the really interesting things you can do with it now. It sort of builds on what was in ArcMap, but takes it up to another level. All right. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to invite all of you, make sure you stop by Esri and look for the Esri booths and look at Panda and stop by. We'll be there. We're actually giving away 3 Star Wars drones, 1 each day. And so let's stop this.
Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.